First of all, general tech support advice. The best advice I can give you starting out with is think logically and practically when you're dealing with tech support issues. And let me explain what I mean by that. If the terminal is not on, check the power cord. If it isn't connecting, check the phone cord or the internet connection. If no receipt is printing out, check if there is paper, okay? A lot of times, especially with new agents, they get a call from the customer and they assume that it is this huge technical problem. And in my experience, about 50% of the time, it has nothing to do with the terminal. It's something really stupid. And we'll go over some of those real common ones, but think practically about it. You know, try to think about the error message that's coming up and think about why we would be getting that error message. Always have tech support call the merchant and get them in the habit of dealing with tech support. This is going to be important to your strategy as you grow your business. Now, I'll explain a little bit of what I mean by that. When I get a call from a customer, let's say one of my local clients calls me and says, hey, James, I'm having a problem. My terminal has an error message. If I don't know how to fix that right on the spot and I can't tell them exactly, I might have them do a couple things, restart the terminal or whatever. But normally what I'm going to do is right away I'm going to say, well, let me do this. I'm going to call tech support. I'm going to have them give you a call back here. So hang by the phone. They'll give you a call in about 10 or 15 minutes. That way you don't have to wait on hold. And then I'll go ahead and head over that way and make sure we got everything taken care of. And then what I do is I hang up with them. I call tech support. And I give tech support the merchant ID number. I explain the situation to them, and then I have them call the merchant. 90% of the time, if you can't fix it, probably 95% of the time, tech support is going to solve the problem over the phone with no problem at all. And then you are going to get a notice from tech support once they complete that call with notes about the call. So you can contact your merchant back and say, hey, I just wanted to check. I got a note back from tech support that everything was okay. I just wanted to double check and make sure. And the more you do that, if somebody talks to tech support 2 or 3 times, most of my merchants now do actually just call tech support directly just because they have confidence that tech support is going to be able to take care of their problem. They might call me if they have some kind of an issue, but I would say, when I first started out, probably 100% of my tech support calls came directly to me. And now I'm probably down to about 20%, whereas 80% of those calls are going to tech support now because, every time I call, I'll say, hey, I just want to make sure everything was going okay for you, and make sure tech support solved that problem. Let me make sure also that you have tech support's number. It's on that little sticker on the side of your terminal. So if you're ever in a situation and you can't get a hold of me and you need to call tech support, the number's right there. So I just keep kind of reminding them of that. I keep building their confidence in the tech support department, and then that's going to save you a lot of time. So really, my best tech support advice is to try to minimize the amount of tech support advice that you have to give. So keep that in mind. But okay, let's go ahead and we'll get into I think I have maybe 5 or 6 of these, and we're just going to run through them real quick. And then again, you can ask me some questions after. Probably the most common error message that you're going to get is COM error or communication error. It normally says COM error on the terminal. That means communication error. This happens when the terminal is not communicating with the host server or processor. If that happens, you first of all want to check the phone line or the internet line, depending on what they're connected to, and then restart the terminal. Now, let me give you a couple of things, a couple of reasons this can happen. If the customer is connected to the internet, this can happen many times if a storm knocks out the internet connection, or if they're messing with their computer and doing something with that. What will happen is if the internet connection goes down, it's not like a laptop. With a laptop computer, it will constantly reset the IP address. So it'll just automatically reset. With a credit card terminal, it will not do that. And so, if you get in a situation where there's a communication error and they're connected to the internet for whatever reason, probably the internet just went down for a few minutes and came back on, and you just need to reset the IP address. And the only way to do that is to restart the terminal. So that's a quick fix. If somebody calls and says I have COM error, first of all, tell them, say, is your internet working or your phone line? Is your phone working? Make sure that it is working. Also with the phone line, what you can do is you can have them plug the phone line that's in the terminal, have them unplug that and plug it into their phone and pick it up and see if there's a dial tone. Because again, the thing that you have to verify first is that there is a signal going into the terminal. Now, if there is a signal going into the terminal, then you have a couple other issues. It could be the host server is having a problem. And rarely this can be a global or first data issue where, for instance, last year there was one day when global, for about an hour, global actually, their server went down. And that's going to happen no matter what kind of system you use. There's going to be downtime. Again, that happened one time last year for about an hour. So that's a pretty good ratio, but you're going to have that happen occasionally. And so, if you get 2 or 3 customers call you right in a row, then go ahead and call them. But just to explain to your merchants and say, the host server is having some technical issues. We're on top of it. But you might have to write down the credit card information and then key that in manually after a little bit of time goes by. And that's the other thing I was going to tell you, general advice about tech support. Your first concern is to get that merchant back up and going to the point where they can accept credit cards. And that may be as simple as saying, do you guys have a receipt book? And they say yes. Okay, take out that receipt book, and for the next half hour, I'm going to need a half hour or an hour to get this fixed. Just go ahead and write out the credit card information. Once we get this all resolved, you can go ahead and key those into your terminal, or I'll even come in and do that for you, or something like that. So that's a way to get them back up and going. Next. No host or server error. No host or server error. If this happens right after an installation, which is normally when it happens, the odds are that the file was not downloaded correctly. So usually what will happen, the most common thing when you see no host or server error, normally what happened was, you don't have the number in there correctly for, like the number that the terminal needs to dial out to. It could also be a problem with the file where maybe the merchant ID number they put in doesn't really exist, and an issue like that. It can also be, another thing I've seen this happen quite a bit is you might see a no dial tone error. A lot of times that can be because you have to dial 9 to get out on that line. So if you have something plugged into the terminal, a phone line plugged into the terminal, and you have to dial 9 to get a dial tone, then you need to make sure the number that's stored in the terminal that's dialing out is 9, 1-800, whatever. If it happens after the terminal's been installed and working correctly for a while, then it's probably that a phone call interrupted it. Interrupted the signal, and the merchant might not even realize it, but while the terminal was trying to dial out, somebody else called in and they have one line. It's not a dedicated line. That'll cause that problem. And in that case, they just need to restart the terminal and run the transaction again. One thing to keep in mind there is that it is possible that it would run a duplicate transaction. Whether you get a communication error or a no host server error, either one of those, it is possible that the terminal was able to dial out and put a hold on those funds before it got the connection error. So that very rarely happens, but it does happen on occasion. And so, sometimes I tell the merchant, hey, just, keep an eye on that customer. If they call you back in a couple days and say they got charged twice, don't be shocked, because that might have happened, and that will happen sometimes. Now, if it happens a lot, and the customer's on a first data platform, then let me know and we will get them switched back over to global. There are certain phone line connections that do not work well with a first data platform, and sometimes that will cause a lot more communication errors. The other thing it could be is an overloaded internet connection. A lot of agents don't realize this, but if you have a internet connection and you're hooked up to that, and they might have, a computer, a laptop, somebody comes in and they're using free Wi-Fi, and your internet can actually get overloaded where there's not enough bandwidth because the terminal, the credit card terminal, is trying to send the transaction really quickly over the internet. It has a really high speed connection that it's sending it over, and so it needs a lot of bandwidth to send out, and so sometimes there won't be enough internet connection to do that, or the internet connection is kind of sketchy and coming in and out. If you have that problem more than a couple times, switch them back over to a dial connection, because it's not worth it to keep messing with the internet. Dial connections, as a general rule, are more stable than internet connections. But again, the internet connection is cheaper, and if they have a good internet connection, it can be very stable. But if they have a bad internet connection, or if they have it all messed up and hooked up to 50 different computers, then you can run into some problems there. Next, tip adjust error. Sometimes there will be a tip adjustment in the terminal that was not properly cleaned out. this can cause the terminal not to batch correctly. So sometimes they're going to get some kind of a tip error. If somebody gets a tip error, then there's a couple things you need to do. Usually, you need to adjust the settings in the terminal for the tips. And this is for any kind of tip error. You're almost always going to have to get tech support involved here because you're going to have to go into the terminal and change some settings to get this fixed. Also, realize that tech support can force a batch. So in other words, let's say that there's a batch sitting in a terminal. I'll use an example of a Hypercom T7 Plus. If you get a Hypercom T7 Plus, they try to batch the terminal out at the end of the night. It's the first night they've tried to batch it, and it says there are unadjusted tips in the terminal. What that means is that there's a setting in the terminal that says every single transaction has to have a tip entered. Even if it's 0, there has to be something entered. And there's 2 or 3 transactions that don't have a tip entered. The way that I would handle that situation is I would call tech support. I would have them force that batch, okay? Then we would be able to clear the terminal out, clear the batch out of the terminal, change that setting in the terminal so it gives us a default 0 tip, so that we don't have to worry about that in the future, and then the problem would be corrected. So there are going to be some tip errors, and again, that's the most common tip error that you get is going to be it won't settle. The terminal will not settle because there's unadjusted tips, and again, that's a simple setting that's in the terminal that says there has to be a tip, and it's not automatically giving each transaction a tip. It's waiting for the customer to go back in. So I'll give you an example. Like a restaurant, they might run 70 or 80 transactions in a day, and 68 of those 70 people gave them a tip, but 2 of them ate at the bar and they didn't give a tip. And so then those 2 transactions are going to keep that batch from being able to settle. And again, you can talk to tech support. They can go in and literally just change that real easily, change the setting so that it's a default 0 tip, so that even if the person doesn't have a tip and the client doesn't enter a tip, it still has a 0 tip, and so the terminal is able to settle. The other real common tip adjustment problems is that you'll get a customer call and say, hey, why doesn't it prompt me for the tip? Or the way that you had the tip set up. And again, those are real simple settings that you can change. But in the meantime, when you fix a problem, write down how you fix that problem, exactly step by step what you did, and then keep that, type it out and store that document in your phone or your tablet computer. I use Dropbox. If you're not using Dropbox.com, you should. It's free and it's awesome, especially if you have an Android or an iPhone. You can have all your documents on your computer. It doesn't take up any space on your computer unless you click on the actual document, then it'll load it up. But anyway, what I do is I'm keeping these tech support ideas, and I put them in a folder on my phone. So if a problem comes up again, when I was first starting out, I would just click on those documents and see, oh, okay, here's what I do for a communication error on this terminal, and that would pull back up. And you can just do that again without calling tech support. Next, card type not accepted. This is usually with an Amex card or a PIN-only debit card. There are debit cards out there, still very few, but there are some debit cards out there that literally you can't swipe them as credit. The person has to enter the PIN number. EBT or food stamp cards, and also for fuel stations, it could be a fuel card. And if they get that error message, that just means that that particular card type is not set up on their account. So, if they get that, if they're trying to run an Amex card and they get that, then that means you never set up American Express on their account, or, data entry just forgot to do it. That is something that can be solved pretty quickly. So that's not a huge issue there. One other weird error you might get, there's a place on the application where you can check that this customer is not going to accept check cards like Visa check cards or MasterCard check cards. The reason that's on there is because some businesses, literally the transaction fee with the Durbin Amendment of 22 cents is so high that some businesses choose not to even take check cards, even running them as credit, because they don't want to pay that real high transaction fee. But I never use that, but sometimes data entry might make an error. And so if you get a situation, I actually had that problem at a Dollar General. I was at a Dollar General a few weeks ago, and they had that error message. It wouldn't accept my MasterCard check card. And I'm like, okay, this is Dollar General, and I actually called the regional manager, and I have an appointment with him to try to sell him credit card processing, but we were able to fix that problem pretty quickly, and I explained what happened and how that with the Durbin Amendment that, you can make a setting in your terminal where it literally won't take a check card. So they got that fixed pretty quickly, but that's, that is an issue that might come up. Two more, and then we'll move on to some questions. And let's see here. Terminal is dead, no power. You would be surprised how many times the plug comes out. I know, you're probably thinking, why did you put this on the webinar? I put this on the webinar because I have probably wasted 10 hours of my life dealing with this stupid issue, not realizing that it was the cord. You would think that you would learn, but somehow, you know, you always think it's something terrible. They're like, oh, the terminal won't even come on. I've done everything. I unplugged it and plugged it back in. Well, here's what happens a lot of times, guys. So pay attention to this. This will save you some time. I promise you. If you're selling full time, this will save you time in the next year. Okay, so they have this long cord that power cord that comes from the terminal to the outlet. In the middle of that power cord, there's one of those things where it's like a box, and half of the cord plugs into that box, and the other half, you know, goes to the terminal, and they got that box there. What happens is they stuff that underneath a counter, and so they can't see that part of the cord because they want it to be out of sight. And what will happen is somebody will like trip on the cord or yank it a little bit or something, and that thing will come undone. So they keep unplugging and plugging it back in, and they can't figure out why they can't get power to their terminal. And it's because in the middle, the plug thing has been pulled apart, and so there's no power going to the terminal. Again, I know that's pretty basic, but that happens. I know that that's happened to me at least 20 times. So that's a real common error. If it is not that, then the terminal's done. I mean, it's dead. You need to do a swap. One thing to keep in mind here, guys, if you're doing a tech support, you know, say you have tech support on the phone, you're working on a terminal, if they can't get the problem fixed, where, you know, it's something with the terminal. For instance, I'll give you the two most common examples would be the terminal is dead. That's a real common example. The other one is where the terminal modem is fried. I dealt with one a couple weeks ago where lightning had struck this place, and one of the terminals, they have 5 terminals there. 3 of them worked fine. They were in different buildings. One of them was totally dead. I had no power. And another one seemed perfectly fine, but it simply couldn't dial out. And I checked the phone line. The phone line worked fine. It just was saying no dial tone. It just couldn't recognize the phone line. What had happened was the modem got fried. And so in both of those cases, tech support sent out a terminal. They overnighted a terminal to the merchant at no charge to me or to the merchant, and they overnighted a swap. So they will send them a new terminal, then the customer takes that terminal, then they put their terminal in a box and send it back to using the return label. Now, one thing I did want to mention about this overnight shipping, just so you guys know, you need to warn your merchant to make sure that they don't just hand the box over to the guy to pick it up. If I was them, I would wait until the next day to return the old terminal, because they need to unbox the new one to see what's in that box. Sometimes North don't send the power cord. So, you know, the merchant takes their old terminal that's broken and they package it all up into a box. They put the return label on it. The guy gives them the new one and they hand him the box of the old one. The UPS guy leaves and sends that. They open up the box with the new one and there's no plug. So, you know, make sure they unbox that terminal. Again, these are just some tips that I know you guys are going to use in the next year, and I think it will really help you to save some time, is, you know, make sure they check it and make sure they have everything they need before they send the old one back. Next one, the receipt's not printing. Usually the paper is in upside down. Maybe you guys might not know this. I didn't know if all of you know this or not, but most of our terminals, like the VX510 and the Hypercom, they use this paper, thermal paper, where one side is almost like, you know, one side is the only side that will print. So if they have the thing in upside down, backwards or whatever, and the wrong side of the paper is coming out where the impression is made, then it's not going to print anything, and it'll just be a blank receipt. And they'll say, you know, they might say, I think the ink is out on my printer. No, the ink's not out. Just flip the paper around so it's coming out the other way, and that will fix the problem. That's a real simple fix. The other one is there's also a no paper mode. Obviously, this is pretty simple, but sometimes it's abbreviated on the terminal. It'll say NPM. On Hypercom terminals, if they get an error message that says NPM, that means no paper mode, and that means they're out of paper. But again, it's funny because merchants a lot of times, it's so funny. I would say honestly probably like 30% of the tech support calls I get, or maybe more than that, I'm able to solve in about 10 seconds now. And, you know, they're like, hey, James, I don't know what's going on. I got this error message. It says NPM. And I say, yeah, Bob, that means you don't have any paper in your terminal. Oh, okay. They open the terminal, they put a roll of paper in, and they're back in business. Or they say, James, my terminal won't come on. The power's out. And I've unplugged it and plugged it back in. And I say, okay, look at the middle of the plug. Is it pulled apart? And they're like, oh yeah, it is. And they plug it back in and it's good to go. So there's just some simple things that you can do that will help you there. So again, I know that wasn't a real comprehensive study of it, but I just want to give you, those are the most common errors that I deal with. And I will open it up for questions if you guys have any. If you don't, that's fine. I realize this is a pretty short webinar today, and surprisingly, our audience was not very large today. I don't know, tech support must not be something of interest. So anyway, has anybody got any questions? If you do, you can raise your hand over to the right, or you can type out a question for me, and I'd be glad to answer it. Oh, let's see here. Matt wants to know if I can send him a copy of the PowerPoint. Matt, these are all recorded now, so, but yeah, I'll send you a copy of the PowerPoint when we get off the call, but it'll be on, in like an hour, it'll be on that webinar archive. Jeremy asks, where do you do your studying to become so knowledgeable on terminals? Some online sites you recommend? You know what, Jeremy, I would love to tell you of all the great sites out there, but I don't. If you find one, please let me know. The reason I've gotten so knowledgeable is just because I had to do it myself. And what I did, kind of like what I mentioned earlier, is every time I would talk to tech support and I had to fix an issue, I would just write down exactly what I did. And if you continuously do that over and over and over and over and over again for like a year, you're really going to start to know the main, error messages. And so I'm trying to compile all of that into a website right now. And in fact, Matt knows a little bit about this project because he's been taking calls. We've been doing a project where we've had actually, Matt, are you? Can you hear me, Matt? I don't know if Matt can get on or not. Matt, can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Okay. Hey, just out of curiosity, I know we just started sending leads from the tech support thing. We have a web page, guys, where customers, if they search, like if you go on Google right now and you search for VX510 error messages, our site is the first one that comes up. It's a terrible web page, but it's a start. How many sales have we gotten from that, Matt? Do you know off the top of your head?
Only one right now, but
okay.
Again, we haven't really
started pushing it.
Pursued that yet.
We started pushing it probably a couple weeks ago. We've probably had, what have we had? Maybe 3 or 4 leads from that?
Yeah.
Something like that. So yeah. So anyway, but thank you. Yeah, we've had like 3 or 4 leads from it. He's got 1 sale. And the idea is, we're trying to generate leads for you guys from this webpage. But again, what we're going to do right now, North American Bank Card, Leon is actually compiling this for me, but it's going to be a huge list of all the error messages that all the terminals that we support have, and I'm going to make separate web pages for each error message and exactly how to handle that particular error message with that particular terminal. And it's going to be, I don't know if you guys have ever gone to like kellybluebook.com where it's like for cars and you select the model number, the year, the make, and all that kind of stuff. That's what it's going to be like. They're going to select, their terminal type, and some different things like that, and then it's gonna, what the error message is, and then it's gonna show them the solution. And while it's doing that, it's gonna constantly be bringing up the, chat with a live agent prompt, and then, we're gonna try to generate some leads in your local market from that. So anyway, all right, let's see. Got any other questions on this one? Any other questions? I am not seeing any. All right. Well, thank you everybody for being on the webinar today. Hope you have a wonderful day.